Hallaq, you live in Gaza, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us. We in Mexico are also wondering what you are going through in Palestine. And first of all, I wanted to ask you, you live in Gaza, right?
Yes, that's true. I live in the northwestern area of Gaza City.
And now a ceasefire is in effect, so things must be a bit more quiet.
Well, yes, things are a bit more quiet, but the situation is not much better, if you know what I mean. Like, since the Gaza Strip is still besieged from all corners, medical supplies and fuel aren't allowed into Gaza. People don't have access to clean water and they can't go in and out of the strip. The infrastructure has been severely damaged and destroyed. It will take years to fix and rebuild what these 11 days have destroyed. During the past few days, we've barely had any electricity. We've only had 2 to 3 hours a day of electricity, which is really bad. Not to mention that since the ceasefire came into effect, the Israeli occupation forces have invaded Al-Aqsa Mosque more than once. Israeli police launched a wave of mass arrests against more than 500 Palestinians, among the Palestinians living in the territories occupied in 1948 too, as part of what Israeli police calls Operation Law and Order, because those Palestinians participated in protests against forced displacement of people in Sheikh Jarrah and the attack on Gaza Strip. People in Sheikh Jarrah are still facing the threat of being forcefully displaced, so the situation isn't really that better.
Now, do you think this ceasefire will lead to lasting peace, or what is your feeling?
No, I don't think it will lead to any lasting peace. We want to live in peace as Palestinians, but as long as we're under the occupation of the Israeli occupation, we will not ever have the chance to live in peace. As I told you, Gaza is still besieged. People in the West Bank and Palestinians in the occupied territories of 1948 are still suffering.
Tell us about this, that you say, this suffering. How has it been the days from the 10th of May until last Friday when the ceasefire came into effect? What was it like for you and your family?
Well, those 11 days were 11 days of sheer terror. Nowhere in Gaza was safe, and everyone here was worried that they might lose their families anytime. Almost, as you know, almost 250 people were murdered by the Israeli attack, and 75 of them were children. I'm the eldest in my family. I have 5 siblings, as I told you, and knowing that they won't get the chance to, that they might be killed or murdered at any time, was completely terrifying. Like living through that fear was really difficult, especially that 2 of my friends, Zainab al-Korak and Riwa al-Zamli, had actually lost many family members. Zainab lost 22 family members. Yes, 2 of them were her brothers. She lost her mother and she lost her sister too. And seeing that happen to your friend, like, makes you feel so terrified that this might happen to you. Never have I felt that death was closer to me and my family than I have felt in those 11 days. And I've already survived 3 attacks on Gaza. This is the 4th.
And you are here?
I'm 21 years old.
And already 4 attacks in Gaza.
Yes.
How would you describe this attack? Is it different from other attacks? Because I feel there has been more polarization internationally, between people that think Israel, or countries that think Israel has a right to defend itself, and also countries and politicians that think that Palestinians are living in conditions that are not acceptable.
Well, yes, this time it was different, and not in terms of how brutal it is, because all 4 attacks were bloody and brutal, to be honest. But this time, what's really different is the international awareness of what's happening in Gaza, mostly because Palestinians have started to post what they're going through, documenting their own experiences on their social media accounts. So people are starting to hear from Palestinians directly, you know, and it's always better to hear from the person living the situation itself, not to mention that Western media usually supports the Israeli narrative. The Palestinian narrative is never heard, to know, if you know what I mean. So that's why a lot of Israeli propaganda has been going on, and finally people are starting to see those lies. They're starting to see through those lies, because they are seeing what's happening on the ground for real, directly from the source that is living through those situations.
Now, I've heard people in Israel, the government, justifies when Palestinian civilians die, because they say Hamas tries to protect their arms by using civilians. Do you agree with that?
No, that is not true. It's also an Israeli lie to justify the killing of innocent civilians. As you know, Gaza is a very, very small area. It's only 365 square kilometers wide, which is the equivalent of 141 square miles. And we have a population of 2 million people. And everywhere in Gaza, like Gaza is a very densely populated place. So another thing would be that, you know, Israel is using Hamas to justify everything it does. But the fact is, we don't have a military force here. You know, like it's always making a distinction between Hamas and civilians. Well, first of all, the Hamas it's not only Hamas. When we say the Palestinian armed resistance, we actually mean many factors, several factions. I mean, several Palestinian factions are actually armed forces. And as I told you, it's not a military force. Like the people who are fighting here in Gaza, they are normal civilians who were forced to take arms, to take up arms against a brutal occupation that is slaughtering their people. So there's you can't make a distinction between Hamas and civilians, because we don't have a military force. They are civilians. And I know most people don't know this, but actually people in Gaza, like, we don't know who those people who are fighting are. As you know, they always cover their faces and all of that. That's because we don't know who they are. We don't have a military, as I told you. To us, they are just engineers, they are doctors, they are people who we interact with on a daily basis. And we only know that they were fighters after they die, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So you can't make a distinction between Hamas and civilians. It's just Israeli propaganda, if you know what I mean.
Now, how was your life before this last round of attacks? What do you do? And how did that change once the bombing started on May 10?
Well, growing up in Gaza is actually very difficult. You know, when you're in Gaza, nothing is certain, if you know what I mean. Like not even your life. So our worries here start from things such as, will I be able to hand this assignment in on time before my battery dies? Because, you know, there's no electricity. Will I be able to attend the lecture because of the internet connection? Then they move on to bigger things such as, oh, if I graduate, after I graduate, will I be able to find a job? You know, will I be able to find a job? And if I get a scholarship to go study outside, will I be able to leave the strip? And then they move on to things such as, if I am diagnosed with a severe illness such as cancer, will I be able to make it out of the strip to get medication before I die? And then, you know, you move on to the worst case scenario, which is, will my family make it? Will we survive? And that is in times of aggressions and attacks. The fear of being the only survivor, if you know what I mean. So living in Gaza, when living in Gaza, you have to prepare yourself for any scenario. It's never easy, even when there aren't any aggressions, if you know what I mean. And just because there's a ceasefire now, it doesn't actually mean that the bombings stop. So every now and then, the Israeli occupation forces drops missiles and bombs on Gaza, but because, you know, the death, not many people are injured or die because of those. There's not much coverage to those random small attacks, but they are enough to instill fear and terror inside of our hearts, because we've already lived through major attacks, and every time that happens, we fear that it might turn into something big.
So again, fear and uncertainty, that's what living in Gaza sounds like.
Yes. You always have to have not only a plan B, you need a plan B, a plan C, D, E, and F. Like, you have to have several plans for everything you do, because you never know what's going to happen.
And when the bombing was occurring, did you have to stay indoors all the time? And now with the ceasefire, you can go out and, I don't know, take a look at how things suffered because of the bombings?
Yes, that's true. You know, we're not even safe in our homes, but they are the safest place during these attacks. We would usually all stay at home. We never leave the house unless we want, like, to buy food or necessities for our home. And usually my dad is the one who leaves alone. He buys the stuff and then he comes back.
And have you gone out and seen how Gaza looks after all these bombings?
Yes, I went out yesterday, and the scene was actually horrible, to be honest. There's so much destruction everywhere. Like, places that were very familiar to me are now completely unfamiliar, because all the houses were leveled to the ground. The streets have huge holes in them because of the rockets, the missiles that landed there. I think it's going to take years to rebuild all of that destruction. I don't know if you've seen any photos.
Well, I've seen since the bombings from 2014, Gaza was still trying to rebuild itself from 2014. So I cannot imagine now what this setback will mean for all of you.
Yes, and you know what's sad? It's that right before this attack, Gaza had started to become a more beautiful place. Places had started places were rebuilt, and you know, Gaza was starting to become more beautiful, and now we're all it's happening all over again. Now we have to start from zero all over again. But like we've done it several times, we'll do it again.
And where does the funding for all of this reconstruction come from? Do you know, Rahf?
The funding for rebuilding?
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of aid has come from Egypt, from several countries all around the world. I don't really know the names of the countries specifically, but Gaza is receiving aid, but it's going to need a huge amount of money in order to rebuild all of that destruction that happened, especially the infrastructure. It was completely destroyed.
Rahf, I'm so grateful that you were able to talk to us and tell us a little bit about your experience so that we can understand both points of view of what people in Israel and Gaza and Palestinians are going through. Thank you so much, and I hope you and your family stay safe. You say you have 5 brothers, your father, your mother.
I have 5 sisters and a brother. 4 sisters and a brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I hope you all stay safe, and I thank you so much for talking to us. For us it's morning, for you it's afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Mm-hmm.